Welcome to another Dead or Alive Last Round Lounge with the 2MK team. This week we are looking at recovery options. Hence the title of the stream. So most of our discussion will be about matchups, play styles, and how you should recover from knockdowns based on those things. This week's free characters have once again shifted. So don't expect to be seeing quite the same as prior week unless the incoming people have got specific characters bought to be used. In a slower game, your opponent has more time to pay attention to the method with which you wake up. People who play specific characters have a lot more time to recognize their position on wake up. There you go. So that's number one. Against a footsie style Kasumi, especially a patient one, you normally want to get up toward the screen. Now this is very specific because with most characters you are trying to get up either left or right based on their moves, but Kasumi doesn't tend to care too much. The reason you want to get up toward the screen and do so quickly is because you just want to get out of her way as much as possible, as quickly as possible. Basically so that she cannot go for any pressure. She benefits a lot from having the character she is fighting relatively far away from her in her footsie phase. You're out of her range for button hits, as in you cannot hit her easily, most characters anyway. But any movement forward will normally put you right in her space. That quick toward screen wake up can definitely help you in very specific ways. If she is pushing forward on you, she's a little more susceptible to a lot of things, especially if you just wake up blocking more or less. Again, this is specifically for footsie style Kasumi. She doesn't have to be played that way, but in the new roster of the game, it's more likely that someone who tries to play her the other way is probably playing phase 4. So your assumption, if you know nothing else about the player or character, is get up toward the screen and not backward. I can tell you there's nothing that I like seeing better than my opponent recovering away from me. You can get some advantage by, if you realize you've done the back recovery, immediately sidestepping to your character's left. Now this part is complex because it's not related to into screen, and therefore is related to which side of the fight you're on. There's also some issues related to whether or not your own character has particular things, and so on. and some changes based on, oh, did I get knocked down by one of her lows? One of the other things you generally want to do, given that she's this type of character, is wake up blocking. But wake up games in fighting games are generally complex. They're supposed to be. The game slows down quite a lot if everyone just either dies instantly or can't do anything on the opponent's wake up. For some people this is enjoyable, but in a game where your defensive options are strong, especially in a game where they're relatively easy to understand, this gets boring pretty fast.
I am ready. I don't have time to play games with you.
Get ready, fight!
Against Helena, Kasumi specifically wants to wake up backward almost all the time. There's nearly no benefit to being closer to Helena.
Get ready, fight!
Helena is one of those characters where when you see her get advanced toward you, you understand what's going on a little bit better. You've bought yourself some time, and she has a lot of relatively committed moves that you can whiff punish.
Get ready, fight!
This is Mugen Tenchi.
It can be hard to do this because you must actually do a fairly complex input, and most of the time when you're fighting Kasumi, you're not absolutely sure she's actually going to hit you. And reacting to being hit is literally one of the hardest things to do in fighting as a whole. Like, in real life, people have trouble responding properly to being hit. In fighting games, it's happening even faster technically. So, getting used to that, getting used to the idea that you were on the offensive and now you must immediately get up the right way, can be hard. But here we have La Mariposa. Generally against her, your wish is, don't get up. Or rather, delay that wake up a certain amount of time. It's quite long too. She can hit you, she can get extra damage off you staying on the ground, but if you look carefully at the amount of time it takes her to do the attack in question, and the damage it does, it's generally to your advantage to just not do anything, at least for a little while. Until you learn to hold her attacks, therefore. Once you're down, stay there a little bit. The next phase, however, is the exact opposite of Kasumi. Feel free to wake up with buttons. You just can't do it right away.
All these hot beats just for you.
Figuring out what thing to do though would be better if you had some sort of general rule to apply. The problem with general rules is, of course, that they fail you if your opponent understands them too.
I can't avoid this fight. Face your fate.
So let's look at that. If the player character plays footsies and your character does not, your general rule is wake up sideways. It depends on how sweeping their moves are, but for the most part, wake up sideways. Especially if they've got relatively linear attacks. If your character plays footsies and for whatever reason you perceive them, your character or your player or your opponent, to be less good than you at said footsies, in any open stage, wake up backward. This gives you the maximum amount of time to respace yourself and puts your pressure on your opponent to figure out where they need to be. It increases the amount of neutral that is played and increases the level of confusion played in that neutral. It also helps you recognize when your opponent is just waiting for you to approach, as my opponent is currently doing. Meaning that you could then just not. To literally wake up and feel completely safe because your perception of the opponent is you don't actually have an attack. So I don't have to do anything. It would be to my advantage, for example, here to just do nothing and hold whatever advantage I had, even though I was the one that got knocked down. If your character plays zoning and your opposing character does not play footsies, i.e. they're usually trying to get in, put pressure on you. If they don't play footsies, then you should also wake up backward. Not because this will get you out of everything, but most zoning style characters in games have good holds, good throws, or just some way of poking at the opponent when they whiff something and cause them trouble. What you don't necessarily want is to get up right away. You want to delay just a little bit so that your opponent thinks, okay, I should go in for pressure, I should hit a button. What should I hit? And you're waiting for them to have just long enough to decide, what should I hit? And then you get up. This works on Elliot fairly well, as he doesn't have a lot of good options that don't involve building up for stuff. You can, in certain cases, also use this to buy yourself enough time to decide, should I even get up backward at all, or should I just hit punch or whatever and get up? If your opponent delays too much, you might want to do that. This will allow your opponent to respace themselves to zoning positions, if they want to, so your problem is solved. See? Helena moves forward, but Elliot has delayed his own wake up long enough that whatever she does wasn't a hit anyway, and then he just takes advantage of that extra space he has to get his stuff. Against the zoner, you normally want to get up into the back, towards the back of the stage, away from the screen. If possible, you generally want to do this. The reason is because it becomes harder to judge distances in this way when the zoning character has to reposition. 3D games have that very small aspect of difficulty in recognizing the difference in distance between characters when one of them is moving into or away from the screen. Something that 2D games have no aspect of except like really complicated stuff in Dragon Ball FighterZ or games where you can completely be out of visible range. This is also why it's actually very slightly useful for such players to make it so that their opponents are knocked down toward a corner or a wall so that they can't get up and move toward the screen, toward the back of the stage, away from the screen. This is a part of the positioning you can hold as a zoner that matters, even if only slightly. The main reason this is important for zoners and not for footsie characters is because zoners are judging the distance between them and the opponent, but they have linear, very long-reaching attacks, meaning if they misjudge, they're going to get hurt. Footsie characters don't care as much. When you failed your back rise, on a character like Kasumi, you generally want to stay down a little longer. This is basically true for nearly every character she fights, actually. Again, because of the double-sidedness of it, the opponent is expecting you to back rise, and as a result, normally isn't thinking about attacking you. They're thinking, okay, I need to get into my optimal position. So you can afford to stay down a little bit, especially because in certain knockdowns, Kasumi gets to use attacks that are otherwise difficult to use, and she wants the opponent to approach again so she can use them. But here we have that moment again mentioned. My opponent is used to being able to count on me attacking and take advantage of that fact. So I can just run out the clock here because even if I take 3 more knockdowns, as long as I get up out of all of them backward, my opponent will probably use about 8 seconds before they actually attack me. The key is that I must find a way to get the life lead in time for this to work. And it has to be big enough that I can afford to take those hits.
I don't have time to play games with you.
Get ready, fight!
So from Helena's side, it's pretty simple. If she has been knocked far away, she should try to get up while tapping, let's say, punch and up on the... No, actually that would be correct. Always get up, tapping, punch, and up. You can even hold the up once you realize you've stead. Depending on the player, you can also get up backward, but you would have to have recognized that their patience was wearing thin. If your opponent's patience was wearing out, then you could absolutely get up that way, because they'd be more likely to be coming for the next strike, hopefully to hit you, and getting up backward would allow you to get them because they whiffed. A patient zoner, however, is not as likely to do this. Similarly, this means that if you are pressuring a zoner in the corner or against the wall where they don't have the option of waking up backwards, you can expect that they'll try something different, but they should still be at more or less disadvantage. This does not mean, however, that you should attack them, because, as mentioned, the obvious next thing to do is stay down a little longer to deceive or stress the person who thinks, okay, I've got you now. I'm coming in and you can't get away. They don't care about you getting away, or you shouldn't care about that. Just don't get up immediately. Problem solved. In this situation, for example, there's no need to go in at all. One has enough of a life lead that a zoning character can't do anything in a big enough space like this. They have to do a bunch of repositioning first to make the situation bad for you before they can go for any real zoning setups, meaning you just win. So, my options are get up backward because I believe in my spacing, or if for whatever reason I don't believe in my spacing at the distance I'm currently at, I want to get up that way. Now, I know my opponent does not have any actual offense, as we've discussed before. They're waiting for me to come to them. we've gone through this on this stream many times. I can probably dismantle my current opponent just by running attacks. Because there's no speed at which they can react to her stuff while still in the zoning mindset fully. Some of those attacks hit from pretty far. So to me, I actually want to wake up backwards nearly all the time against the particular opponent in question because I know I have huge advantage there.
This is Mugen Tenchi.
Seems we're looking at Mila versus Elliot. Mila's generally a fairly pressury type of character. She does have some longer strikes, but they don't really count as zoning because she doesn't have a bunch of options in them. She can do basically one of them, and if you see it coming, it's decently easy to deal with. She's similar to La Mariposa in that if you don't get up at all, you're a little better off if she wants to continue going. But if she doesn't, you need to figure out which get up to use, and you gotta do it pretty quickly because she has a lot of good close range options. There's one now. Depending on which knockdown Mila gets, she has the MMA style, I'm going to beat you up while you're still on the ground, so better get used to it. So let's look carefully at Mila's movement. She's one of the first characters where you'd have to do this. You're looking for what her quick attacks are and which way they track, especially lows. Mila's low kick is done with her right foot. If you watch carefully, you might get to see it a little bit later. She has another strike that is a little bit better but doesn't track as far. In general though, this means that you want to get up to Mila's left. Not all the time, because she does have other options. It's not that simple. But for a start, let's go there. You want to get up to Mila's left most of the time. The easier way to remember this is get up to your own character's right side. However that works for you. She does have good moves that will potentially hit you. They will even sometimes stun you if you went for an attack. But the way that wake-ups work in 3D games is a little interesting, and you'll have to do it to see it.
That was a great fight.
Helena actually has similar options in this situation. Helena's running attacks are not necessarily weak, it's that they're very committed. Unlike Kasumi, where she can start them from really far away and you cannot tell that it's happening, Helena is a matter of spacing. But
Get ready, fight!
she still has them, and she still has some good strong ones if you can learn the proper spacing for them. The key to understand is that, just like Kasumi, you should probably start her moves, her running moves, from really far away.
Get ready, fight!
Which means that you are utilizing the same back recover, and then going for a running really long strike as soon as you manage to start the run. But the good thing is that most of the time she doesn't actually have a problem with this. Helena's running attack is a really telegraphed low, but she doesn't care. What you can see, however, is that she actually moves so far forward once she hops to do it, that the only reason to not do it really early into the run is if you think your opponent is going to see and hold it, so then you care a little bit. The other reason is to do that, to make your opponent think that it's coming, and then just go for the mid. Helena's main problem is that, unlike Kasumi, who just gets free knockdowns from there, it is a low, which means she has no knockdown. She has to figure out what to do after it. Fortunately, she has a good set of options.
Get ready, fight!
So mainly, after the knockdown, she has enough situations that she prefers to keep going. The opponent can sometimes go, well, I'm not going to let you keep on running in at me, I'm coming closer, but that's what she wants, so you're happy. Generally, the advice I'd give to Helena players is that once that low hits, go for her sweeping one, or don't do anything. Because if you pay attention, that low hitting puts you at a perfect space for whatever else you wanted to do. And the zoner's unhappy now, because now they have to recover before you can hit them with footsies. This is true of every zoner in the game I'm aware of. I do not have enough experience with all of them to say for sure, but for the most part, if there's going to try to zone you, this will work on them.
I am ready.
I don't have time to play games with you.
Get ready, fight!
Come here.
Well, given that Kasumi's not up at the moment. Again, one of the problems with having that whole loser stays on thing, but we're probably not giving it up. So we will have Rune Siren practice and check the distance for that running low. Again, there's very little combos you get off it. I think there is one, but I don't know Helena well enough to say. One would have to check it. But look at that spacing, especially when you do it perfectly. Helena's position as a result is just so good compared to what she normally is aiming to do that you have nearly nothing to worry about. This is only true though if she gets it at near full range. In other words, if you end up really close and you've done it incorrectly, you're not at the correct range. It's also not a very whiff punishable move, as it basically puts her in a low stance, or something akin to one, that she can immediately flow into. So a lot of people would miss out on the fact of this, because if they're trying to outright whiff punish the attack, not intercept it, but whiff punish it, you got some good stuff, but nothing quite good enough that Helena can't stop you. The key therefore is to recognize your opponent would have to react by trying to hit you early, which, depending on their ability to flow, would work, but their perspective on how to do it might not be what you expect them to have, and you might get punched in the face a couple of times. The key is you don't actually care. This situation is so advantageous to Helena that getting hit in the face a couple times by long moves intended to stop her from doing this isn't really that helpful. But she has so many good options from this move that your opponent can't afford to just hit buttons and hope, because you can even attack them in a way that makes them whiff and then follow into your own whiff punish stuff. Aha! Our opponent is awake. Maybe. We'll see. But we're switching over to Amara today, for now. So we're back to the discussion of wake-ups, relative to Phase 4 in this case. Again, generally, she wants to wake up backward. The problem with Rachel waking up backward is that you have to be fairly patient once you've done so. In fact, this is part of the reason why one generally doesn't want to knock Rachel down. If you can extend your combos without actually letting Rachel fall, as you've seen our Kasumi and Phase 4 user to do before, you kind of want to do this. When fighting zoners, both Phase 4 and Kasumi and to Helena, which we were just mentioning, become relatively hard to throw because they're going to tend to be in their crouching stance once they get close to you, meaning you must do your low throw all the time. However, you can't do your low throw while walking forward to touch them by most standards. This game does not have a down forward crouch movement style. One of your better options therefore is, if you're worried about it, is to attempt your down side step, which is into screen, it doesn't really matter, and throw from there. Your up one is less likely to help, obviously, because you're no longer pressing down on the stick for the throw, and it doesn't matter too much.
Out of my way.
That was a relatively sticky lag, but we should get through it. We are on to Honoka. Honoka is a problem in this particular mindset, this way of looking at the game. This is because Honoka has other people's moves, and that means that understanding how to wake up versus Honoka is completely dependent on what you think the player wants to do. There are a couple things she lacks, so she can't make you really miserable in particular places, but overall, she's not even all that much of a knockdown character, making your life even harder. She can beat you up quite a lot without ever putting you on the ground. Rachel's best bet in a lot of these situations is just to use her forward kicks, which generally give Hitomi at least some stress. If they're well spaced, she's not really that able to do anything much about it. This is partially because at the maximum range, a lot of Hitomi's moves just miss this strike, and she has to go for like dash up throws and other weirdness like that. But she's also a great character at faking vulnerability. Rachel does have another great advantage though. Once Rachel hits certain moves in neutral, and anyone in this game more or less blocks them, she's at a great advantage. So she can afford to just hit punch in certain places, with the full intention of the opponent blocking it, and have advantage immediately. She can then retreat, and get back into her zoning space, and let the opponent get themselves back to the same situation. She also doesn't have to respond to a whole bunch of stuff Honoka does, as she's not the most damaging of characters in just, hey, I've poked you in neutral. And she doesn't get knockdowns as a result. If you don't understand what that feels like or means, you can really contrast this to Kasumi, who basically spends her entire game kicking you really hard in the head and sending you flying. Honoka can do this, but she has a lot less options for the job.
I'm so sorry. Can you stand up?
Now we've gotten to the interesting part. We now have two zoners. It becomes a question of better zoning instincts and better mid-range keep-out tools, though. Rachel has less of them than Elliot. So generally, she doesn't necessarily want to wake up further away from him, whereas he tends to want to wake up further away from her. What Elliot lacks, though, and what you should automatically recognize in situations like this is Elliot has two types of knockdowns. The one where he was playing zoning and managed, which is harder to do because Rachel is so much better at avoiding getting hit by Elliot's zoning. She's worse at avoiding getting hit when Elliot gets close. This shifts a lot of things though when you think about it. Elliot is closer and as a result gets to keep on hitting for a while until the situation shifts, and then his zoning is back and he can win from it. But most of the damage Elliot gets on Rachel is not from zoning, it's from being too close. what is Rachel's best option therefore? She doesn't really want to get back to zoning immediately, as this allows Elliot to keep on pressuring her. She doesn't necessarily want to stay down either, even though he doesn't have a lot of good attacks for downed characters. If he knocks her far away, she should wake up backwards, because then she has zoning advantage again. It was probably bad luck when she got hit by the zoning going in. So she doesn't mind, she gets to repeat that until she gets it right. Waking up forward like that, however, normally means that an approaching Elliot gets advantage. So she generally wants to wake up backward in that situation and take her chances with her holds or her own zoning. Once Elliot is close though, Rachel normally wants to wake up with her kicks, as in the kicks you get from being on the ground. This is because Elliot's spacing and general flow in attacking means he's likely to want to hit more buttons. And it also means he's likely to want to backdash out. Backdashes are not covered by standard defense at all, i.e. you don't block during them, meaning that she often has at least a small moment where she can land a strike before he can actually get away. But the only strike she can normally land is the kick you get for doing wake-ups. Any other wake-up allows Elliot to escape. Similarly, if Rachel goes for pressure after with Elliot's attempt to get up backward, which he basically always wants to do, the situation gets reversed. Rachel loses because Elliot does not need to wake up with the kick. He can just wake up normally and cause her stress. So, generally on a close knockdown that was not specifically intended, Rachel doesn't want to pressure Elliot at all. Unless she's using her stomp, which is the point. Now against Helena, we have this previously mentioned footsie versus zoner situation. And Rachel most likely wants to wake up backward. Helena in turn wants to wake up away from the screen. It doesn't matter as much when you've been hit by a zoning attack from Rachel at relatively closer range, but you still want to try something. In order to wake up in different ways in this game, you generally have to do it like Quick Rise in other games. You have to be aware that you got knocked down and immediately tap the direction you want to get up in twice, or the direction you want to get him up in plus a button. And in that case, you technically only need to hit them once because it's kind of like a weird plink. This is normally the easier wake-up option, and the one most people should learn and keep in mind. You can use, I think, any button. I'm not aware of any restrictions in which button you use, but if you use your H plus K, it may result in an attack for some characters, and if you use just K, if you put in the K first, it again may result in an attack for some characters. So I suggest that most people who are getting used to this learn to do it with either hold, which can help in various ways, or punch. So as part of that, we will also be having the team work on that today, as we really haven't covered the wake-ups before. And being able to do that is really important. Also, in addition to what we mentioned last week, Amar will probably be practicing the secondary version of Rachel's twirl. It's very important when you're playing Rachel to recognize Her twirl is long enough, and the invincibility on it short enough, that twirling in neutral against most characters, most zoners particularly, does not help you. You must first do an attack and cancel the recovery of that attack into the twirl. Otherwise, you've basically just given your opponent a free hit, unless they just happen to be attacking already. In other words, if you think you can do a twirl on a read, you are wrong. The reason for this is because even if you were correct and your opponent intended to hit a button, the invincibility will end before the button actually reaches you, in almost every case of long-range attacks. If you must attack in that way, therefore, have Rachel do her punch first, and then twirl out of the recovery of the punch. Usually I think it's forward punch, but I'm not sure.
Get ready, fight!
This is generally something you want to do from very far away anyway, so it's not really that big a deal. I'm not sure what is up with that repetitive thing. I guess he was done or something.
Was I too hard on you?
But that does bring us back to Helena. Now, when you've mastered the punch or button plus direction wake up,
Don't have time to play games.
you can use that one to always get the wake up you want if you have the correct input, even after you stayed down for a while. This can drastically increase the amount of calm you have in a match, if you don't need to actually get it quickly. Doing it right with other buttons might be difficult, but it's easier to do the other way. I don't think this game has a forward wake up. It specifically has that if you do the forward plus direction, I think you just get up standing. Some games, 3D games, do have forward wake up, and this is important, so keep it in mind if you're learning basic principles of 3D games from watching this. But I do not believe this game has any forward wake up on any character. What it does have is a sort of diagonal roll thing that it can do, especially when you're near a wall. This has to do with something about the relativity of screen versus where the camera could be, or something else I don't remember right now. It's intuitive, so I won't try to put it into words precisely. Just understand that if you are near a wall and go for a sideways wake up, it may not look exactly as you want or would expect. Rather, let's go with expect, because it's normally what you want, but it's not necessarily what you expect to happen. So try it out a little bit, maybe it will help you more than you'd expect. Against footsie characters, however, because of the distance and the quickness of the move, Rachel really can twirl on a read. And this is then one of her stronger weapons. The opponent can in turn just do slower moves, but at that point they're not really getting any advantage at all. The aim is always to reduce your actual play to the bare minimum that you like doing, and everything should more or less be a method to get back to that situation. This is true in nearly every fighting game. Which is why sometimes descriptions of matchups from higher level players in games sound really boring, because they're basically going, okay, I'm going to repeat this thing basically indefinitely, and when my opponent does this, I'm going to do this thing so I can repeat the thing some more. But you must understand that the reason they're playing the character in question is because they like doing that. That's why they play them. They like doing that thing. A little early, but still kind of worked. Again, the idea is to retreat when Rachel has ground advantage, because Elliot doesn't gain much from staying there, but she gains things from getting to position herself before he gets up. Then she gets to go back to zoning, and more or less win by patience, honestly. She's also one of the characters who benefits the most from getting the opponent to attack her while she's come in and blocked. This is because they can't afford to launch their attack any differently given her long zoning range. When you're uncertain of your range with Rachel, therefore, your better option is to come all the way in and just block immediately. Especially if your opponent's lows aren't so good. This is because she can space herself such that the opponent can't throw her easily. Once most characters are at that maximum space where they've hit Rachel, she has blocked, but it's now her turn, they have to either commit to another attack she could hold, usually a kick and therefore allowing her to do her forward hold, or make it possible for her to hit them with a standard punch. And that's basically just, we can't call it a 50-50, but in the mind of the player it can be.
I don't have time to play games with you.
Come and fight.
Get ready, fight!
Once Rachel's personal space has been violated, however, it's a little harder to control the match. As she's not really a character with a whole lot of great options for stopping people from doing stuff once they get into her bubble. This is probably one of her greatest weaknesses as a character. She has to defend and wait for her opportunity, which technically might never come if the opponent is determined in a particular way. It's very important, therefore, for Rachel players to master defense, primarily because they don't get to counterattack in most situations. In short, block. A lot. You have to kind of ignore the fact that she gets thrown, because your opponent, if Rachel gets to throw her opponent as often as they get to throw her, Rachel automatically wins. It's as simple as that. Your opponent's wish is to make you do things until you are throwable. But Rachel doesn't care. Rachel gets to throw people much worse than people get to throw her. So she can just stay blocking until they make a mistake. Wanting to counterattack is generally the faster way to lose with this character than even letting yourself get thrown repeatedly. This is because the opponent cannot risk approaching too close or trying to get into her bubble more than necessary. They will either telegraph something and get held, her long throw range will overpower them, or she will get out in some other way, because she does have some weird ways, especially the twirl. Meaning, For the most part, you will be surprised how long it takes for people to beat this character if she's just blocking. Blocking and watching for that moment where she can throw them. She's almost a grappler in that regard. She does so much damage from other situations as well that, okay, whatever. And because she can constantly do that long-range counterattack, there is not really a space at which you can fake out Rachel. She just gets to block, period. You'll notice, for example, that nearly every bit of damage taken is either a low or just going, okay, I've just been thrown, so I should get up and like counterattack now. But she doesn't have to even do that. There is a point at which you should probably attack, but she's one of the characters in the game where you should learn this more so by blocking first than by hitting buttons first. There are some characters who manage things by hitting buttons and seeing which buttons work. Rachel is not that character. But as you know, this is Amara's general character style. I'm going to block until you have left yourself open, because you have, by my character's design, you must. You have to do it. I am eventually going to get my chance because my character is designed to block. And as soon as you mess that up, then I get my stuff. She also, as you can see, has a lot of moves that allow her to whiff and then throw, making it even easier.
Great match.
On top of that, her standing, her simplest possible jab, I believe, maybe her back one works as well, is not one of the faster buttons in the game, but for its length is in fact this way. So a lot of the time, if she really doesn't know what else to do, but the opponent is decently close, just keep holding back and press punch. See? Against footsie characters and strong mentally spaced players like Rin, this is a little harder because they have a better sense of when to throw and a stronger ability to get close to do it. But if they're wrong, Rachel does way more damage than them. And obviously, as soon as you've given Rachel the impression that you're going to try to throw her after a certain amount of time, she no longer has to worry about the rest of your mix-ups at all because of the nature of your character. So she gets to do a bunch of other things, basically. As soon as she realizes you're probably going to try to throw me, but you're too far to do it without walking, she can hit buttons now. And she has lots of good buttons to hit in those spaces. So it's just a matter of recognition. If you've decided to get in on Rachel and hit buttons, eventually she will see, okay, you can't throw me without walking forward more, so I'm going to hit this. Or she will realize you're about to throw me because you found some move that I didn't react to, and therefore I should throw tech out of this by obviously hitting throw herself. If you happen to not go for the throw, depending on the situation, she'll end up throwing you, And this is disadvantageous to you again.
Now do you understand, my dear? I can't avoid this fight.
Come and fight.
But we're back to Kasumi. Kasumi is relatively easy to zone as noted, but only if you let her stay really far away. You need to keep Kasumi relatively far away from you. But because she tends to stand further away than other characters in the first place, Rachel gets to use her kicks more. And that's about all that's different.
Get ready, fight!
Kasumi is not really a character that can break Rachel's block in most situations unless she changes the way she plays and flows. So, just block.
Get ready, fight!
She has, as some people would say, a solid lady. Kasumi definitely does have setups in which Rachel will absolutely get hit. The key is that these setups almost always set up nothing after them and don't do much damage. It takes about 10 hits of this type to defeat Rachel, at minimum. Whereas, if Rachel gets even slightly lucky, it only takes her 4 hits to defeat Kasumi. Well, big hits anyway. Even that, which is basically the hardest hit that Kasumi can land on a blocking Rachel, is still... It's not going to happen that often, and it's still not that devastating, so whatever. Whereas that is a large hit. This is actually why you see me use that move so much, because I'm so expecting people to basically block or do block after certain spacings. And it's Kasumi's best way of getting damage there, otherwise they could just keep blocking. So when you see me use it when I'm playing Kasumi, it's partially because I really just don't feel like waiting for my opponent to stop blocking. And I kind of expect them to continue. It's also a very difficult move to counter straight up. So it's okay with me to just use it every now and again and hope it wears out. All these pieces fit together with different characters and players.
I challenge you.
I'll make sure you regret this.
Get ready, fight!
One of Rachel's easier advantages on Elliot is that her running attacks also beat him up, if he's expecting her to use the lunge instead.
Get ready, fight!
Meaning that if the two characters get fairly far apart, and Rachel can fake out Elliot, it's fairly easy to win from there.
Get ready, fight!
Elliot has to either approach, or face her run-in mix-up. Because she's also a heavyweight character, it means that she comes to a stop faster, meaning she can just do certain moves easier. And her long-range standard punch is therefore even more useful. Once a player becomes confident with this character and realizes the range of that same punch, it's fairly easy to take down a lot of people on approach because dash up punch is a thing, basically. The opponent must then switch their fighting style, and it's a matter of working out from there. Again, Rachel doesn't really care about the damage she takes from doing that too much. Most moves that people use to respond to Rachel's run-up stuff are not strong enough to make her really worry about the damage she takes, given the damage she dishes out. So it becomes a slow dismantling of the enemy.
Not too bad. I don't have time to play games with you.
Good luck.
Get ready, fight!
We've often mentioned in our Guilty Gear streams that sometimes in order to get enough distance to properly approach a zoning character, you have to get further away from them first. In DOA this is not always possible, but this is one of the things needed to fight people who already have that mindset. In other words, this is the same problem, if you've watched our Guilty Gear lounges, that Rune Siren's Ino has with Space Wolf's Axel. Rune Siren does not retreat first before attempting to approach, meaning that there's no specific reason to expect that Space Wolf has not completely controlled the ranges involved. It is imperative that you never let a zoner get the impression that they have complete control of the spacing. if you simply respond every time they knock you away or down by just coming at them again, chances are they will just learn to put you there
Get ready, fight!
and continually beat you up for that reason. If you do not feel as if your spacing is correct for the move you want to do, back off. Give yourself the time and space to set it to what you want. The worst that will happen is that the zoning player will approach, and then you can like occasionally suddenly mess with them for trying that. Your situation is just flatly better if you do this. Standing still for too long and giving them control of that spacing means you have lost outright. Any decent zoner will take advantage of that moment you have given them, where you can't decide, should I go in again? I'm not sure. And the spacing is currently visible to them, they will destroy you for this. Never give them that moment of you standing still long enough for them to decide the zone. The only time this is even remotely useful is when you expect that they can see the zone is bad and want to approach you, but most of the time they'll just inch forward or something.
Match.
But we are back to Kasumi versus Helena.
We settle this. I don't have time to play games with you.
Get ready, fight!
While Helena does have good throws positions and could just do the same thing Rachel does a lot of the time, she benefits from the fact that she has really good footsie buttons and can control Kasumi's movement a lot better. Therefore, she doesn't have to block. There comes a point where she realizes, oh, I could just let you try to attack me and fail. This is because of her good ability to use lows to reposition herself, whereas most characters cannot do this so well. Kasumi has a lot of high attacks as mentioned, and in previous streams I've said, just hold high. At max range, that is. Helena gets around this in that she doesn't have to hold at all. She just has to launch an attack that will put her low enough that Kasumi is forced to use her mids, and that forces her to get closer. Ooh, a little hesitation there. I don't remember it being laggy though, so I guess it was probably just hesitation. Simple rule therefore, if you think Kasumi is going to attack from further away, go into a low. Or low stance at least. If you don't, hit buttons. I.e. if you think she's going to try to get closer first so that she can use mids. But of course, the problem still stands that if you expect Kasumi to attack you, but are wrong, all of this motion might have put Helena in a bad situation for doing her own attacks, so you have to be very careful about recognizing when you have positioned yourself poorly for attacking, and when basically Kasumi is just trapping you into being where she wants so that you whiff and die. Kasumi therefore benefits a lot from blocking low, but there's, as noted, some good tricky mids that Helena can do. She's a very fluid character who more or less does what she wants. But not on the very first attack. She has a certain set of first attacks, but once she's done that first attack, she has a lot of freedom relative to what you'd expect from most characters. But outmaneuvered and probably
I know what I must
emotionally flustered. So, Kasumi takes the win. As a character, Jackie can be perceived as a less straightforward Jan Lee.
I don't have time to play games with you.
Get ready, fight!
Basically, he wants to get into your space and abuse the fact that his buttons are good and forward moving, so he gets to stick to you. This is a character that for the most part is strong, as long as you don't know how to hold him. And he's not all that easy to hold, honestly, so... Fortunately, punch holds are mostly a matter of back hold, and therefore if you can see the things happening, you can go for back hold mid or back hold high and not think too much about it. He has some good kicks, but his main game plan isn't going to be around that. If you don't know what else to do, therefore, once Jackie's close, especially if you weren't hitting buttons enough to get counter hit to start with, just hold mid. This will then generally have him knock you far out enough that he could mess with you by using other styles of attack. As a footsie player or a zoning player, this is what you want. You want options and you want to not have to be so close to Jackie as a whole. He wants to start his stuff by hitting you with kicks and similar and lows, but the key point is don't counter attack after these. Characters who are good at closing space get at least a small payoff from their lows and similar things, because they just get to rush in at you after them. In other words, when you get hit by the lows, just take it. Backdash out if you want, it might not help. Hold if you really think they're going to keep attacking. In Rachel's case, I think you can sometimes twirl, but the overall thing to learn is lows are not that dangerous. The sort of characters that have good dangerous lows
I got no time for you.
are those who often end up fighting from far out and aren't that advantaged at close range anyway. They just poke you a little bit and they get to continue. Ah, Hayabusa. So we're back to talking about wake-ups. Doesn't seem like it's laggy, so we're gonna assume that it's going cleanly. Hayabusa is a complex character because which wake-up you use, he's straightforward. Use your wake-up according to how far away he was from you when he knocked you down. If he's a little too far out for like a bunch of weird attacks, wake up backwards. If he's really close to you, stay down, for the most part. If you are low on health, you might want to take some risks. But if he's really close to you, stay down a little bit and then get up forward to one side, more or less. If you're near a wall, you can probably get up to one side immediately. There's also some stuff based on which move he hit you with, but we're working on beginner stuff. We're not looking for stuff you could learn to recognize and get better at the game at through. Generally, this is true no matter what type of character you're playing, which is a little weird. Normally you care about what character you have as part of working out the game plan for the wake-up. But Hayabusa's damage and confirms in certain situations, especially weird ones, are so good that your first priority is take no more damage. As Hayabusa, your general wishes are similar to what Rachel actually wants, even though he's not really a zoner. If your opponent is approaching you, wake up backward because he doesn't have a lot of great options there, as you already see demonstrated. And if you're not sure what they're going to do, just wake up with your kick. Chances are you'll manage to get something off this and get away with it, because he's good at confirming from far away. He can be played in most of the styles in the game. He just doesn't specialize enough in any of them to get really anything out of it. But his teleportation definitely helps against zoning players.
I have no weakness.
Hey, thanks, he pointed out for me. You can actually see that difference in level of specialization between him and Rachel by things, as I mentioned, where it's just I can block forever, I have good dash up punch, all those things. You didn't really see any dash up punch uses. His isn't terrible, but there's a reason you didn't see it. It's not so strong that you just would do stuff with it. Whereas with Rachel, you'd absolutely just do stuff with it. In fact, that right there is probably one of the easiest ways to actually see and understand what I'm talking about in terms of why Rachel in particular gets to just block. There are definitely moves that do effectively guard break, but most guard break moves also have a decent amount of pushback, so your opponent can't just immediately start hitting you. Rachel is usually so far away that when she gets hit by guard break moves, the opponent doesn't get anything at all off it. You could try to get closer before you did this move, but she'd probably punch you.
Get ready, fight!
She's also one of the few characters in the game who can see a charging opponent coming at her and just hit punch.
The taste of victory.
Or at least some punch. My point is that most characters, their fastest punch is a high. I don't think Rachel's fastest punch is a mid, but she does have some really fast mid punches relative to other characters. And they have heavy stagger sort on them. She's also good at pushing forward from them and so on. I'm not as confident in that particular thing. I have to check on her move data, but you can definitely check it out.
I challenge you.
Come and fight.
Get ready, fight!
Most long lunging run attacks are twirlable though. which is the other side of her defense. But you don't really have to use it. It's a little helpful, I guess. But you don't have to care.
Get ready, fight!
What Rachel can do is use it when she's approaching very slowly. As soon as she's worked in the potential that, hey, I might just block. So you can't just use moves that I can't twirl, because those moves are almost always bad ideas when I just block them. Meaning that this sort of thing happens a lot. She walks towards you slowly, inexorably making your life miserable with her advances until you die because you think you have an idea and you're totally wrong. Beating her up before that is key, but good luck with that. Because eventually what will happen from there is you will leave yourself open to her zoning because you see her walking forward at you as an option for you to do something. And you'll be wrong. Like, punch to the chest wrong. By that. That moment, for example, was what we would call a hard read. Rachel approached. The opponent went to move. Rachel assumed you're not going to do something that hits me out of twirl or messes me up, and went for twirl and was wrong. But that isn't really a sign of anything in particular. That's just the standard interaction of fighting games. Sometimes your highly tactical strategy with the 70% chance of working fails because it's only a 70% chance. Learning to get used to this and just go, okay, that's fine, I don't mind, it happens, is super important. However, it's kind of hard to learn in this game. There are so many options that unless you have someone to talk you through the base of them, as I'm attempting to do, it can be hard to recognize that the thing you did was right by basic probability, and it isn't perfect. In short, you had a 75% chance of it being right 3 out of 4, and it wasn't. And the only takeaway from it is, sometimes it's not right. This looks like it's going to be super laggy.
I am ready.
I'm not sure if it was before though. Maybe it was just a pull-through.
Ready, fight!
This is a terrible stage to do any sort of discussion on because of the specific strict limits of spacing. Therefore, I will not say anything.
Get ready, fight! Get ready, fight!
Now that we are back on the bottom level and have some space to actually discuss what could happen, we're back to the general discussion of this matchup. However, the only thing I really have to say is if you can't do the running attacks against this particular Elliot player, you're probably just going to get zoned out. As you can see, there really is no benefit to Kasumi just flicking out buttons. If Elliot is blocking, she will often hit in the right space to get the sort of person who wants to hit more buttons in response, but the timing is fairly random. You can't know that Elliot won't just use his, like, back roll kick the same way he uses against her sister and probably win out. But even that slight running attack is useful because even the running standard punch, the mid that helps out here, is still useful enough. Not because Elliot as a character cannot generally stop these. It's just that his methods are, strictly speaking, not really advantageous. This is because of the many options Kasumi has for how to do this.
I'll defeat anyone.
And the long range of her moves, meaning she has a lot of options for stopping short and then launching a regular attack. But I suppose we're going to get a different demonstration of Elliot now. Always helpful. So thanks to Isaiah if they are in fact clear enough on Elliot play to demonstrate how this is supposed to go, quote unquote.
Get ready, fight!
Elliot, like Helena, does have a couple of good approaches that will go under Kasumi's long-range highs. He can also stick to her, and she's not a character who is super good at stopping stickiness without holds. Unfortunately, he's kinda easy to hold when he's trying to be sticky, so there's that. Case in point. Since Kasumi can be so hard to track sometimes, you gotta be fairly dedicated with Elliot to get certain things done. However, he does have one or two good fake approach strings that could get through her attempts to hold. The problem is, again, you're kind of guessing. And Kasumi's holds, while not the best, against particular mids, she's got some really stronger ones. Highs and lows depends on what the attack is, but you can be kind of messed up that way. But you could see overall that that was more so a matter of Elliot approaching using buttons and then choosing the right one to continue a good attack string afterwards. He didn't really need the zoning, but the main reason he doesn't need the zoning is because of the hold situation and the fact that Kasumi's buttons are really light or will whiff entirely based on his approach, as mentioned before. Go under her highs in your approach buttons and you probably have some chances. She does have some things she can do there, but they're very committed and likely that if you decided I'm not going in at all, I'm just going to block until you're too close to me, then she's at disadvantage again.
I am ready.
Get ready, fight!
This match we haven't discussed that often, but it's relatively easy to understand. Ayane hits really hard and Kasumi doesn't. Or rather, in the situations that the two interact in neutral most of the time, this is true. If Ayane makes a mistake, Kasumi can dish out some fairly heavy damage, because the types of mistake Ayane makes, when she does make one, can lead to big hits and confirms for Kasumi. Other than that, Kasumi has to very slowly wear down her sister. If you do hold enough of Ayane's relatively telegraphed attacks though, not that she has to use these, but if she's going for big damage, she'll toss a couple of them in there. If you do hold them, as demonstrated, you can get some decent damage. As mentioned before, just now literally. In the Elliot match, if one holds correctly, the same sort of thing happens. But understanding enough about Ayane to hold her in every situation is a little much. Kasumi's better option is often to just use her mids as shown there. If she expects Ayane to dip approach, just go for a mid punch. If Ayane gets close but has rift, go for a mid kick. That's basically it.
Don't make me laugh.
Okay, we have a rotation as our Kasumi has in fact dropped her back this time. Now here's a matchup we almost never see. Mainly because the only person we know that plays these characters plays both of them together and therefore cannot fight herself.
I don't have time to play games with you.
Okay, let's fight.
Get ready, fight!
The basic understanding of this matchup has to do with holds. In order for Lei Fang to really approach Helena, she normally must do one move first and follow it with another. The difficulty for Lei Fang is that she's not one of those really tricky characters where she can follow X with A, B to H. She normally follows X with Y. But she has a good advantage there. If she can convince you to wait for her to do this, or to misspace yourself, she gets a big payoff for that. Your goal therefore is to do that. To launch very long range attacks at Lei Fang, to make her want to approach before she can do anything in specific. And then watch the approach for what you can hold. She in turn will sometimes have to use her own really long attacks for the same purpose. But generally, you won't take too much damage from this, and you can avoid some of those attacks pretty easily. If you don't feel like she's going to approach immediately, then just go for your normal running attack and see what you get. She's not super good at punishing or with punishing those moves, so overall, your benefit's pretty high. If she decides to hesitate and not go for the second hit, the interesting thing about this game is a lot more stuff is reactable than you'd think, in terms of holding it. I mean, you can delay a certain amount of time to at least get the feeling of if your opponent intends to do their next attack. And if they don't, then you can obviously go for one of your own to whiff punish their first swing. And for a character like Helena or Kasumi, this is pretty easy to do, range-wise. It helps that for Helena, Kasumi, and certain other characters, this sort of long-range strike tends to leave them really far away from Lei Fang, meaning it's easier for them to control the situation.
Yay!
sure you regret this. Face your fate.
Get ready, fight!
When attempting to get better at these games, specifically attempting to get better, this is not if you are having fun or trying to win. When you're specifically trying to get better and you realize you've got your opponent in a loop or a situation like that, you need to consider whether or not you had other options. In short, if the reason you are able to do X at Y space
Sure you regret this.
is because your opponent does not know how to hold it yet, and you don't really have a better option, button, or mix-up, you are probably going to cripple yourself eventually. If all hits from X space that could actually lead to anything dangerous are holdable in the same way, you're not going to get anywhere against savvy enough opponents. So, while you shouldn't necessarily not do it, depending on how you want to continue or how much you want the game to continue, you should absolutely consider, once you have done it, is this a good tactic for me to be relying on? Should I look for something else that might help me more? Ooh, it looks like an execution error. You can definitely tell there's two zoners fighting because they've managed to stay on this part of the stage for 2 rounds. but not 3. Yeah, it still managed to hold around with the whole slanted floor not falling off yet. That sort of thing is generally safe. For some characters, the follow-up move to their wake-up kick only works if the opponent actually got counter-hit by it, but you can confirm that counter-hit really easily compared to most things. After all, it's on the screen in red, and the move that you normally follow this with is kind of slow.
Get ready, fight!
I'm really gonna manage to finish this match without falling off now. That was a terrible idea. Oh well. That's actually probably a good example of what I'm talking about. To go for the second kicks there is a generally bad thing to aim for.
Not too bad.
Even if the move itself is relatively hard to hold for your opponent, you should generally assume that if you keep that up, they're eventually going to find a way out of it, even if they're an otherwise very blocking style person. Because blocking is not risky. Meaning that the only way this move would ever have hurt them is if they decided to try to counter-attack it. You get to keep on doing it, sure, but you should always remember that. If your opponent has a meaningful out, whether it be an invincible move in a 2D game, or a hold or parry in a 3D game, and their other option is blocking,
I challenge you.
you can't keep on repeating things like that, because the eventual result will be that they will choose to do that thing. It's not beating their buttons, because they'll eventually just stop hitting actual buttons. The Elliott mirror is obviously very dependent on player style. This is true of nearly every mirror match in nearly every game in the world. There are a few where situations such as meter or starting opening gambit or other weird things have a really big effect on the match once it started, but in games like this where there is no meter, and most of the time the starting positions don't matter that much, it more or less comes down to who is more patient, understands the character better, or is willing to take certain types of risks.
Get ready, fight!
That said, let's look at style difference. Zoning Elliott tends to beat up on Sticky Elliott. But obviously this will change once Sticky form of Elliott gets in, because that's where the power comes from. So in terms of our previous discussions about Wake Up, if we assume that one Elliott is playing Rushdown, let's say, and the other is playing Zoning, then Rushdown Elliott wants to get up to the side whenever they can, and Zoning Elliott wants to get up backward whenever they can.
Please fight. I'll defeat anyone.
we've got another rotation around. The stream has gone longer than usual due to our larger number of people in the lounge and larger number of people sticking around to actually test their metal against others in specific ways. So, we will in fact be bringing it to a close soonish.
I am prepared.
But not necessarily closing the lounge right away because, I mean, there are obviously people in it.
Do you want to fight?
But we're back to the Kasumi-Ayane matchup mentioned before. If Kasumi's spacing is correct, Ayane doesn't tend to get big damage. It takes her a while to set it up. But Kasumi gets even less damage, meaning that the comparison between their damage remains the same. As mentioned before, therefore, Kasumi's best bet is often to use her mids from decently far out, as while Ayane can counter-attack after them, and Kasumi then does have to deal with some mix-ups, those are functionally still mix-ups. And if they land, Kasumi gets more damage than she normally would against her sister. If certain ones land, she has advantageous positioning as well. One of the main things you have to recognize from the Kasumi side is sometimes you just don't want to do the second part of the attack. Normally against every other character, standing in front of them like that is dangerous. But because Ayane players tend to be quote-unquote greedy with their damage, they're waiting for you to leave yourself open in the mistakes you make.
Don't make me laugh.
But since Kasumi can delay so many of the follow-ups to her moves, they can't afford to just counterattack immediately. This is super important for how she's played as a character overall. She has variable frame traps. She can do a move and immediately do the next part in the chain, or slightly later do the next part in the chain, giving her opponent just enough time to try to hit a button and lose. She does have a limited number of these though, and they are all fairly close range mids, so they don't work well on a lot of other characters. They work pretty well on Ayane specifically. Because Ayane wants to hit her, Ayane doesn't want to hold.
Face your fate. We settle this.
Get ready, fight!
understand, my dear.
This is likely to be our last on-stream match of the night. We've gone over quite a bit from our usual. Don't expect it to continue, even though we probably are having Dead or Alive next time as well. Next Friday, that is.
Come and fight.
I wouldn't say to count on that either, though. We do have some development to do for Dragon Ball FighterZ bot content. And it may in fact be done by then.
Get ready, fight! Get ready, fight!
When facing a character that is heavily about motion and trickiness, it's important to remember that in order to actually be tricky, the player must use the tricky option at least once. In fact, it's a really weird thing to think about it, but you can't convince your opponent that you are tricky at the game unless you make sure to use most of your options, which even when it would not necessarily be advantageous to you to even do that.
Get ready, fight!
But more importantly, a tricky character who is not using their tricky options for whatever reason is usually just limited because they're just lacking tools. Whereas other characters who are, for example, specialized in zoning will have multiple ways of dealing with situations from there. A character who is meant to be tricky, who is using only one tool, has now limited themselves strength-wise to whatever that tool does. Therefore, you can spend your time learning, what advantage can I get out of this? How do I wake up correctly against this? How do I space myself so that this is least damaging, even if it is really not that avoidable? All of these things happen because the character doesn't have other strong options without going to that trickiness in question. Kasumi is like this in one particular way. If you realize your opponent is trying to fake you out with their approaches, you can just back off more. She often whiffs in ways that make her life difficult, and you're getting tricked by standing your ground, for example.
This is Mugen Tenchi.
But as is, we are done in this stream for the night. Again, the lounge will stay open a little bit longer. You will see it marked as 2MK. As always. On Monday, we'll be having our Mishmashing Lounge for Street Fighter V. And on Tuesday, Guilty Gear Xrd Rev 2, the Tuesday train. Next week, Wednesday, is likely to be Sandbag Casuals for Street Fighter as well. There's a small chance it will in fact be the OA, but again, don't expect it, and you can only bother to show up if you generally don't have anything to do at that time on a Wednesday. Next Thursday will be Dragon Ball Fighters Lobby Kame House, bringing us back around to Friday, which is again more likely than not another Dead or Alive last round lounge. This has been Rillian for Team 2 MK. Good luck with your training, and good night everyone.